Welcome to Resourceful Humans. I'm your host, Corey Haber, and today I have Brenda and Anthony with me, both very, very experienced in HR, and we're going to hear from them, their opinions, their tips, and also things that we can do during this pandemic time in the remote world as in regards to performance management, which I know is something that a lot of people are struggling with because the remote world is very new for a lot of businesses and employers. So thanks for coming on today, you guys. I'm excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, Corey. Excited to be here.
Thank you, Corey. Me as well.
You're welcome. So, let's get started. And I have a question that I really just am anxious to hear what you guys have to say about it. But as far as performance management, how do you feel managers or HR professionals are handling performance management or performance issues in terms of monitoring the performance right now while their employees are working remote without being micromanagers?
So, Anthony, you want to answer that first, or?
Or I could start. So my experience since COVID-19 started back in, I guess, mid-March, it was a little bit of a struggle in the beginning with managing poor performers, and really there wasn't a lot of activity going on at that point. We were kind of trying to give the employees the benefit of the doubt, at the same time trying to get as much output while we were trying to get used to working from home and dealing with the pandemic and that sort of thing. Now I work in a very diverse work area, which is manufacturing and office work. So it was a bit of a struggle with people being at home and then going into the manufacturing site here and there, as well as people working from home. So as we got a few months into it, into the pandemic, things started to kind of normalize where people were more used to working from home on a daily basis, as well as doing those various shifts on the manufacturing side. So the managing of the performance did get a little easier, and we resumed putting, performance plans and coaching, formalized coaching and that sort of thing with the employees. I didn't really come into any situations where managers were micromanaging their employees. Of course, there was a totally different dynamic with the way they had to interact with the employees, such as WebEx or Skype or the phone, as opposed to just stopping by their desk, which is typical. So there was a little more work on both the manager and the employee's part to get the communication going. So there was that part of it. But again, as time went on, people got used to it. The managers got used to it. The employees got used to it. And we did, as we did start seeing performance issues, whether it was in the sales force, people not meeting their sales budgets, or whether it was in the manufacturing area, it was again, we resumed the performance plans and the coaching and that sort of thing, and we kind of tailored those performance plans to fit the issue of COVID-19. So I'll give you an example. So normally in our sales force, we tend to make sales calls, meaning visits to potential customers, vendors, that kind of thing. And as we found out, some people were not meeting those expectations. Some people were really meeting those expectations. They found ways to use the technology available to make those calls and to get those potential sales. But for the ones who didn't, unfortunately, we did kind of tailor their performance plans for the COVID-19. So we would use certain words like, to utilize the technology to make those calls. So that's really been my experience with performance issues in this pandemic since March.
Very good insight, Anthony. I mean, it seems like I've been exposed to a different type of experience where some of the folks that I've been in touch with don't have experience in remote workforce, right? They're actually experiencing something the complete opposite, where they are having issues. Let's talk about technology, right? Something that wasn't in the budget before, and now they have to kind of figure out how to provide technology, Wi-Fi, laptops, to their employees. And for a long time, I heard, oh, well, my internet went down, or my employee couldn't access her or his laptop, whatever the case may be. And so I think that for those who are not accustomed to this, they're going to see some challenges and still up ahead when this is going to become the new norm. What I am finding, though, which I'm liking, is that before, where they thought this wasn't possible to have a remote workforce, now they're understanding that they can. And I've also heard where, oh my gosh, this is something where we can accommodate should an employee is unable for whatever X, Y, and Z reason can come in. This is something to look at for the future. So it's been quite interesting, I'll tell you, in this remote workforce management, performance management, workspace that we're in thanks to COVID. But I think this is something that's going to really stick. It's not something just for the COVID-19. I have a good feeling that this might stick for a little longer, and not just because of the pandemic, but because now some folks are seeing it that is a possibility to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I actually should clarify a little bit. My company, so if you're in an office environment, more likely than not, you are working some kind of virtual work, whether it's 1 day a week or 2 days a week, and this is all prior to COVID-19. So most employees who are office type employees have that access to work from home. They have the laptops, they have the technology. We're a very large company. Again, the manufacturing, not so much. We had to deal with that with shifting schedules and maybe 2 days on or 2 days off, and giving them some kind of time to make up for the time they normally would have been there, just to keep that social distancing and those COVID-19 guidelines, intact, depending on what state they're in, or at the time, whatever restrictions were involved.
Right. Yeah, some of the folks that I've been in touch with, some employers are allowing their employees to come in, provided that they do keep the social distancing guidelines, where instead of two people cubicle or facing one another, it's every other cubicle you'll see an employee there. And they're actually giving option because they have received some hesitation from some employees who don't feel comfortable coming in to the office yet. And so a common question is, are you okay coming in? And sometimes, no, I'm not. And it could be for a myriad of reasons where they're not able to come in, school, support, all those other things that can affect employees' lifestyle because of COVID. So there's a lot to consider when having someone an employee come into the office. It might not be a possibility at all. So that has to be a conversation and see what can be accommodated. And I don't see where we can't do that if it's a possibility.
I just really want to back it up for just a minute. I want you to, or I'd love for you to share, as far as just before the pandemic or no pandemic, what are the best ways for a manager to manage performance in general? I mean, and then I'd love for us to kind of compare how it's changed a little bit. But in general, I think it would be nice to hear your opinions on how to manage performance, and maybe some stories that you might have of successful performance management, or even not such a successful performance management situation.
Such a great question, Corey. I mean, one of the things that I use in the office at the company, and also coach and develop folks that I work with closely, is I talk about the SMART acronym, right? When managing performance, you have to make sure that whatever the project may be, whatever the task may be, it has to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, right? So in all of those things, I'll provide an example for all of those things. So, be specific. And what type of project are you having the employee work on? Is it cold calling, as Anthony may alluded to for Salesforce? How many people are they expecting to call, whatever the case may be? Is it realistic to call 100 people, or is it realistic to call 200 people? You have to really kind of develop a metrics where these are the areas where you're measuring employees' performance, right? What else? Is it attainable? Has it been have we had experience where an employee has met these goals and they've exceeded them? And so what were their best practice? Do we have that available? Is there any documentation available that we can provide and then add to it in terms of their experience? Right. And so is it realistic? Absolutely. Or if it's not realistic, then we have to revisit what are those documents, what has been documented in terms of what to expect for an employee. And all of this, when is it due, right? For an employee to work from home and they're not used to work from home, right? There might be some other distractions. They have a kid home or a spouse at home, right? Or puppy or dog, whatever the case may be, whatever whatever they're going to experience, they may get distracted. And so, but doesn't matter unless you have those SMART goals outlined. That's how you're going to measure your the employee's performance, right? And that's how this is kind of your tool, your metrics to provide an outline and some guidance. And no matter how they achieve them, they'll be able to meet them. And if they don't, then we have to look at, is it realistic, right?
Right.
And if they have,
is a good way. Yeah, realistic, I think, is the key word when it comes to performance management, because you will make employees feel like they're failing if your expectations are far from realistic.
Absolutely. You don't ever want to have an employee feel like they're not meeting their goals. And if they're not and they are realistic, then you have to have those conversations and make sure what's preventing them to meet those goals. Is it communication issues? Is it, technology issue? Is it time management issues? So there's just a whole lot of things that conversation has to need to be had with the employee itself, just to make sure that these SMART goals are met. Anthony, any feedback?
I totally agree on I'm a big fan of the SMART criteria. But I would also say, I think all employees should get some kind of basic outline of what their job actually is. So, I know it might be cliche in some areas, but a job description would
absolutely
really, help in that department. And again, those things should be fluid. Obviously things change over time, but it really should just be a general, what does this person do? Or what are they responsible for? What are the expectations of the job? Now, from year to year, when you're looking at, okay, we're going to do performance, and I know a lot of companies are getting away from the whole performance appraisal thing. They're going more to like ongoing performance assessments. But I think for most of us, we're still doing the annual performance reviews. So I think, again, using the SMART criteria, you put in targets, you put in responsibilities. What are the projects that this person is going to be working on this year? And again, those things could be changeable throughout the year, but it's on the employee and the manager to kind of keep that updated. This way, at the end of the year, the manager has that opportunity to make that assessment. And again, we all know things change. I mean, obviously this year with COVID-19, I'm sure, a lot of companies are just going on their merry way, doing what they were, tasked to do. Employees were doing what they were tasked to do. The whole world in March, and, maybe the strategy changed. Look at companies like Ford or GM, they were making cars and they were making ventilators. So, we just, and that's an extreme example, but it's just an example of we have to keep up with the changing environment, even every day, in order to properly assess the employee and what they're doing. And then on top of that, I think there needs to be discussion. There needs to be, I remember a time when managers would talk to their employee twice a year because they had to. That would be at the mid-year review and at the year-end review. And sometimes they would even skip the mid-year review. So it would just be that end of year, and it would be basically a 2-minute conversation. Yeah, you did great. Here's your rating. Go back to work. No, I think the manager really needs to have more ongoing discussion. I would even argue a couple of times a month, or maybe more is needed. I mean, if somebody's struggling in their job, you may have to kind of have more of a dialogue, before you put the person on some kind of coaching plan or performance plan or something like that. There needs to be that the employee should not come surprised when, the manager says, hey, we're putting you on a PIP now. That should not come as a surprise at all to the employee. Unfortunately, it does a lot. And unfortunately for the manager, those are the PIPs that don't survive, because they're not usually managing the PIPs, they're managing the pips just like they were managing the prior performance. They're not. So, and you asked for an example. Those are the examples of non-success stories, but maybe not one you were thinking of, because I have advised.
That's great.
I have advised managers in the past. Look, you're not living up to your end of the pip. We have to move on now. So.
I absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Brenda.
All right. I just love how you kind of worded where it needs to be ongoing. Doing orientation when I speak to the employees, hey, just because 90 days are up doesn't mean that we're not managing your performance. And if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to ask, because what happens is an employee feels too comfortable when a manager takes a laid back approach. And I'm not saying for a manager to be on top of the employee and constantly at their beck and call, asking questions. I mean, you want to provide some sense of accountability and some resourcefulness for them to just go out and get their information on their own. But at the same time, if you're not, kind of asking, hey, how's it going? Is there anything I can provide for you? You're not going to get much information from the employee, right? And you want them to provide you with information where I need another screen. I can't work, right, from one screen and trying to do all this data entry and then have you expect me to turn it in at this time. Right. So constant open door policy, a dialogue, conversations would be nice. And I've heard some horror stories where employees get terminated for whatever X, Y, and Z. They're not meeting the SMART goals, right? And so instead of making adjustments on those SMART goals, because I also heard the last time a job description was updated was about over 15, 20 years ago. What's going on? Time changed. Look at the situation we're in now, right? So there's going to be a lot of things that have to be looked at, reevaluated. And I think on top of that, having one-on-one conversations, maybe not as frequently. And so when the annual reviews, I look at annual reviews as a money review. Are there any merits attached to this annual review? Yes, it might be, or no, but at least you give some sort of feedback to the employee just to let them know where they are on the ongoing basis.
Right.
No surprise.
I really agree with what you guys have said as far as how often someone should be reviewed. From my personal experience, not the job I previously had, but way back when I had a different job, I would only get a review every 6 months. I know when I first started, the first one was after 3 months, and then it moved to every 6 months after that. And I remember thinking it was just so frustrating, because if I was doing something that they felt I could be doing better, I had to wait for 6 months to even know and then try to correct it. And I also feel like it's sometimes setting up your employee to fail, because for several months they're going on doing something that they could have corrected way before then, and sometimes it's too late by the time you let them know in a review. And that's how I felt. It was frustrating. I would always ask for feedback prior to it, but it made me feel uncomfortable, because it made me feel like I shouldn't be asking for any feedback if it wasn't the formal review. And then touching on the job description thing, I honestly think a fun activity would I would love to see if employees could just write out what they think their job description is, because I bet you almost no one could match what it was when they actually interviewed and obtained the job. So that's an interesting point, Anthony, you made, that to give the job description to the employees, because I think it doesn't sound cliche at all. I do think a lot of people really don't remember or know anymore what it is. They just get used to doing their responsibilities, and that's it. So
yeah, I mean, I like the job description because it serves the employee as a metrics. Like, okay, if I'm gonna get a review today, these are the items I'm gonna be reviewed on, right? But then they forget to see that the bottom line says, and other things as needed, right? If an employer is diligent enough to put that as a bullet point in their list of responsibilities. But you're right, Corey, and things change all the time, and job descriptions are not as consistent as they were before. I mean, everybody's wearing many hats, and the reason for that is because of budget, the economy, technology change, the demands change. So employees probably feel overwhelmed, and managers are not guided properly as well. So I also think that managers should have some training in this, because they don't have the proper guidance. So how they can guide a team if they don't have the resources and tools to do that properly as well.
Right. And I kind of want to throw you a curveball here. I know we didn't really discuss this before, but HR is really, a lot of the HR professional's job is to be guidance and to kind of guide your managers and your teams into how they can work with their own teams. So in a sense, you're not doing the performance management day-to-day techniques for every employee. In a sense, it should be teaching the leaders of your different areas of the company how to manage performance for their teams. So really, what are some best practices that you have as far as teaching a manager or teaching someone else how to manage performance? And I know sometimes it all falls on HR, but it is imperative, I think, that your team leaders know how to do that as well.
Yeah, I'll start with this. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints and sitting through bulleted, just templated trainings for managers on. I mean, while that's a good resource sometimes, where you could give that to your manager to, as a checklist to say this is what you should be doing to manage performance. I really believe it's inherent on the company, depending on how large it is, maybe the team or the business within the company, on how they should be managing the performance, because it all depends also on what kind of jobs they're managing, what level managers they are. All these things kind of come into play as to how, but really in the end, it's probably the frontline manager that will be doing most of the performance management. Yes, some of the higher level managers will be managing their managers below them. But by that point, in their career, they pretty much know what they're doing for managing performance and what expectations to set and that kind of thing. But I think it's really incumbent on the first line manager because they're dealing with the day-to-day. And again, I think I'm more of the approach of a tailored type of training, maybe coaching, but also, and you could give that overview of how you think performance should be managed and how to manage poor performers and that kind of thing. There's certainly general fundamentals of doing that. But to get more in depth, I think a tailored type of training, trying to understand the organizational culture, the history, that kind of thing. I think that's important in trying to give the best advice for performance management. And then, of course, dealing with the one-on-ones. So if they have a certain situation, each situation may be different on how to handle. So that direct line with HR and the frontline manager is crucial. So.
I couldn't agree with you more, Anthony. I mean, I think that training should be tailored to the specific of the employee and how they learn. Not every person learns the same way, and not everyone has the same need. I think that should be considered highly. And I love PowerPoints and presentations, but I'm a big fan of one-on-one coaching and mentoring. And coming from the HR space, I've worked with a lot of general managers in the hospitality industries and also frontline managers when they're trying to manage their employees and trying to coach them and develop them into their position or groom them to the succession of the position, right? Providing these feedback and kind of guiding these managers in how to respectfully speak to an employee. I mean, as an HR professional, I always look at myself as a liaison, right? Not the person that, okay, this is how you do it, I'll take care of it, but more as their liaison, someone who they can come to resolve problems, be the mediator when there's a situation between a manager and an employee. Because what you want to make that communication work. They're going to be working much more together than the employee or managers with HR. I mean, they should look at HR as a resource and as a door where they can come in and ask all the questions they can and take advantage of, oh my gosh, what I'm supposed to do with overtime? What am I supposed to do if they are not meeting their uniform requirements? What am I supposed to do if they spill coffee? And this is like the 10th time they spill coffee. How am I going to make them stop spilling coffee, right? Or if an employee is having struggled to meet those uniform requirements, why? don't ask me, have the conversation with the employee, right? I wouldn't know. But if you do need some assistance, I'll be more than happy to help you develop that rapport and create these questions that doesn't make an employee feel intimidated or uncomfortable, because there might be some situations where they're not feeling comfortable, and that could also be because of the rapport that you're not building with them. One of the best examples that I've learned doing contract work and understanding what the workforce needs is just asking them, what got you here? Where do you see yourself 2-3 years from now? Are you in school? And if they tell you they're in school, oh, okay, great. What did you study? Things like that. Do you see yourself long-term in this position? And so this is how you start building rapport. The managers need to start doing that too. And I see more and more often that the P&Ls is very important. And I get it. In operations, P&L is extremely important, but also managing your team expectations, because as the leader, they're looking up to you a lot of things, and managers is looking up to HR for so much more things. And so I am so proud to be that liaison, to be that mediator between employee and manager, and make sure that relationship works. That's me.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And I also wanted to touch on this earlier, but it might be a good time to do this. But and again, managing performance, whether it's in a larger type training, one-on-one coaching with a manager, you always want to ensure that they understand that it's important to manage the what is the employee doing. It's easy to talk about widgets. Obviously, there's very diverse jobs out there, very technical. Can't even begin. It's just infinite, the intricacies that go into each job. But I think the two most important things to look at are, what is the employee doing, and are they meeting those expectations? And number two, how are they doing it? And I think the second one is the one we always lose, because this is when behavior comes into play. So I'll give you a simple example. I'll use the sales again. Somebody's making their budget. Somebody's over budget. They're really great, but they're yelling at their customers. They're not very nice to deal with. Their communications are way off. Just short answers. Yes, they're meeting their responsibilities, but the attitude is just not there, and they're not really representing the company in a great way. And so those are kind of the softer skills that make it really difficult on the manager to manage, because they're not there with that person every day. And in fact, the person could be across the country. The manager could be in New York, and the salesperson could be in LA, but they're getting feedback from their customers about how awful this person talks to other people. And so that person really needs to kind of compartmentalize those discussions, really get into, well, what's going on? Get the feedback from the employee. Is this going on, and why? This was reported, and start that documentation, and then coach that person on, look, you really need to change your way, your tone, your way of talking to people. So again, that's the how of ensuring that the employee is doing what they're supposed to do it and how they're supposed to do it.
Right. I like that, what you just said there, because when it comes to managing employees and meeting sales goals, like that P&L that I was talking about, it's important for the company to create that revenue stream, but it's also important to revisit the core values of the organization and what the organization stands for, right? And so when you hear these things, and I've had worked with organizations where it's completely a sales organization, and they're very sales driven, and it's all about what revenue you're bringing in, but how can you continue? And then I hear the problem, we're churning clients. Well, the reason why we're churning clients is because who you're putting up in the forefront and dealing with these people. And so it has been allowed so many times, and I've heard some great sales organizations that they don't condone that, and they revisit with the employee, and they start having some performance conversations and say, listen, while we do respect that you're bringing in the revenue, we also understand we don't want to continue putting in dollars in advertising for creating these clients, because they're so hard to come by, especially now in COVID. So it's very important just to keep that self-awareness for the employee, teach emotional intelligence as well. There's a certain stressor when it comes to meeting these deadlines and quotas. And so does the employee have that emotional intelligence to handle the stress and work with employees and not get all buckled up into the stresses of the company's demand and also what the client needs. And so I think that sufficient training and creating that self-awareness for everyone in the organization, also revisiting the core values of the company, is super important, super essential, just to avoid what you just said.
I think that's very true, and I agree with that. And really, I wanted to bring in something before we run out of time here that I know has been a common concern for a lot of people. If someone's job right now does involve coming back into the office, even if it's part-time, and part-time being virtual, and someone just absolutely does not feel comfortable and doesn't want to come back, how do you manage their performance if their performance management is reliant on them being there? For some companies, it is.
Wow.
It's a hard
question.
If somebody's not comfortable returning, I mean, by this point, if it's an office job, I think it's pretty safe to say that they're probably able to work from home for the long term. If it's some kind of blue collar, manufacturing type work, then yeah, I mean, they probably had a return at some point already, or some kind of modified work. Now, we did deal with this earlier a few months ago, where people didn't feel comfortable coming to work, and the company can only extend, some companies, maybe not all, depending on your size and your budget, maybe can extend some more leeway to the employee to say, hey, take the time off, or they're just going to say you're going to have to figure it out and take whatever vacation time, sick time, depending on where you live, your state, that's allotted to you. But at some point, they're probably going to have to return with those precautions. Of course, that's up to the employer to make sure that those precautions are in place. But again, from my experience, if it's an office type environment, then if you're not comfortable going back, then as far as I know, we're not making you go back at this point.
Right. I think that it should be taken a case by case, but also be very careful how that's handled, because you don't want to send the message as, well, this person has special privileges. It has to,
Right.
If a work can be modified and with reasonable cause, then I don't see why an employer does not allow an employee to not come back to work. I mean, I think the question in managing performance, there shouldn't be anything changed unless it's something that requires for the employees to be on site. Then we have to start revisiting a modification in their labor, right? What are the things they can do in the meantime? And that's going to also require a conversation about salary. Maybe what they were doing before, they were earning more, and now they have to earn less because what they were doing previously, it's a whole different job, right? And so I've heard folks like, well, we're going to have to let them go because they're not meeting these expectations. And I'm like, no, we have to look into other opportunities. Now, if it's reasonable for the organization, I mean, I'm not saying go ahead and create a job just to make this person feel comfortable. But if a position does exist and it allows them to transition into that position, then of course, by all means, kind of revisit that and set the tone for a culture where, hey, I'm not going to lose my job if I don't feel comfortable, but also set the tone, hey, if your job requires you to be there, just give me reasonable feedback to why I should readjust your position or the role. But the feedback and performance management should not change. I think it should be consistent across the board. I think that if you follow the SMART goals and provide specific metrics for the employees to follow, whether they're working from the office or working remotely, virtually, then nothing should change. But if it's a difficult employee, well, that may require a little bit more touch points, right? Touch bases. Like instead of calling this employee maybe once a week, maybe touch base with them first at the beginning of the week and towards the end of the week, right? Set some specific goals on an ongoing basis and set milestone goals, not long-term goals, but short-term goals, and kind of see where that goes and see how the employee reacts to that change and how they perform under that. So, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of pushback coming into the office, but it has to be reasonable for them not to feel good. And it also could be they have families.
Right.
right? With school being an issue,
Yeah,
right?
the big
There
issue right now.
is a huge issue right now. Let's
communication with your employees. You know, as the guidelines start changing, and let's say you are opening up your offices again, or having some kind of modified openings. You know, make sure that your employees know that, and right up front too, and let them ask questions, have briefings. You know, explain to them what's going on, what you're required to do, what you're not required to do, what's optional, what's not. This so they're aware and it's up front for them. So you have time also to have those discussions. Like if they're not comfortable coming back, you know, you could work on those, like Brenda said, on a case by case basis.
I agree. I agree. And I think all of this was really helpful because I know that this is something that a lot of people are struggling with because they're so used to doing performance management with a system or a process that they've set into place and never had to be outside the office. Or even if they're remote, I still feel like now that the kids are remote, if someone is used to working remote, their remote world is very different now. So I think there's a lot of changes and we have to change with it. So I appreciate you guys coming on, and I think you had wonderful tips and feedback for everybody.
absolutely.
Hopefully you'll come again.
Thank you.
Corey,
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
pleasure here too.